All right, so I will try to make that up for anybody attending asynchronously. Apologies for those attending asynchronously for picking up this recording late. By next lecture, I will have that down. I'll put a sticky note or something like that so that when we start the lecture, I'll start the recording. Definitely apologies for that. For those joining asynchronously, it looks like most people are on synchronously right now. There is an activity B4, that's due before at lecture B4, which is next week, which is a week from today. It's on Tuesday. Make sure to do that activity before the lecture is scheduled to start. Those due dates are all embedded in Canvas, and on your muddiest points, take a look at the comments that I made on the muddiest points. So far, we've just been reviewing what we've been talking about so far and trying to show this more specific case where we can go from the fruit example to the example that Burke and Helfand talk about in their chapter, which is talking about electricity as a good and all non-electricity consumption is another good. And we can put those two goods together in a two-good economy that we plot in this simple plot here. This axis is the total amount of electricity you use in milliwatt hours, and this is the total amount of stuff you use in this weird indexed unit. So there isn't like one unit for that. So it really just has to be some funny index of all other consumption, just for simplicity. So we say that if you start in one bundle, like this orange down here, and you move to another bundle, and that bundle brings you an improvement in all goods simultaneously, you have made what's called a Pareto improvement, a Pareto movement. When we start talking about social welfare, which is really where this Pareto framework first came up when people started to think about this, then we think about movements, let's say policy changes that change everyone for the good, that allow everyone access to more utility. And so we say we want to make Pareto movements when we make policy changes because we want everyone in society, everyone who has standing, to increase their utility simultaneously. And eventually we get to a point where that's not possible anymore, and that's the so-called Pareto efficient set. So for a single individual, the Pareto efficient set are the bundles of goods, like this banana and this apple, for which changing between them will mean increasing some goods and necessarily decreasing others. So they are how we characterize individual level trade-offs. If you have an individual level trade-off, it probably lives inside a Pareto efficient set. The level of societies, then that's how we characterize decisions that are harder to make, because those decisions, let's say tax policy, regulation, those sorts of things, are going to hurt some people at the benefit of others. And so Pareto efficient societies so Pareto efficient sets are sets of policy decisions which, if you move from one to the other, necessarily are going to reduce the utility of some population, where they'll increase the utility of another population. And what we'll talk about later when we talk about aggregating utilities is a special type of Pareto efficiency that allows us to make a decision about when it's sort of okay to decrease some people's utility. So like, how do we properly account for how much utility does one group need to gain to make it warranted to reduce the utility of another group? What's one way of thinking about that? And that's where we're going with this. But for now, at the individual level, we're just thinking about an individual making a choice between fruit or between consumption patterns. And if they moved from one consumption pattern to another, they will necessarily reduce one good while benefiting from the increase in another good. There was a question about attendance, and we will, the attendance questions come up randomly throughout the class. And so I'll ask attendance questions randomly, and you fill them in. Then you'll go to a URL that I give during the attendance question, you fill that in, and then you submit it at the end of class. And then I also keep track of, so I can see there's 40 people attending here, and I do have a record of who's attending there. The attendance questions are meant to help the asynchronous students also provide the answers to that. So I do sort of keep track of how people pop in and out. And so some people say, you know, well, can I get the attendance questions up front? Because then, you know, so there's a question in the chat about, can I get the attendance questions now? Because when people get them at the end, they leave and they come back at the end and they only answer them then. If I give you all the questions now, then you'll leave now. So that's why they're peppered throughout the class, and so that we sort of give everyone an opportunity to pay attention during the class. All right, so enough about attendance for now. So that was a private question that came through. Choosing among these efficient, that's what we call, this is how we quantify a trade-off. And the other types of trade-off we worry about are trade-offs that are induced by budget. And so we talked about last time that if I give you a budget, you can only spend so much at the grocery store, or you can only spend so much total on utilities. Then we set up a budget constraint line. And that budget constraint line, which you'll play with today, you basically have a budget of B. So here's this budget. So let's say a budget of B dollars, for example. And we can say, if we know the price of fiber, so we'll call the price of fiber PF, then we know that if we divide our budget by the price of fiber, then we can figure out the maximum amount of fiber that we could possibly buy, which is that point right there. And then so if we go on, then we say that, okay, if we know the price of potassium, then we can take our budget and we can divide it by the price of potassium. And we know then the maximum amount of potassium we could possibly buy. Now, if you buy all of that amount of potassium, you can't buy any fiber. You're stuck with this bundle down here. If you buy all of the fiber, you can't buy any potassium. So you can stuck there. Oh, thanks. So I apologize, Julia, you were raising your hand earlier. I'm sorry, let me see if I can put the participants list in a place that's a little more focal. So if you've been raising your hand for a while, feel free to speak up. Or just get my attention somehow. I only see my video right now, and I only see the participants list off on the side, so sometimes I miss the little icons in the chat. So I apologize, Julia. Did you have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so I had something to clarify kind of based on last lecture, and I guess it goes into this. So you can have multiple Pareto efficient sets, correct? Or is it only multiple Pareto improvements?
You can have, that's a good question. So you can, you have one Pareto efficient set, but there can be multiple ways you can improve. Like this orange, it can improve. There are two Pareto movements you can make from the orange. You can go from the orange to the apple, that's a Pareto improvement. The orange from the banana, that's a Pareto improvement. But once you're at the banana, if we don't worry about the potato right now, but once you're at the banana, then you're stuck. There's no more Pareto movements you can make. So it must be in the set, check. Once you're at the apple, you can't make any more Pareto movements. So it must be in the Pareto efficient set, check. All of the options from which there are no Pareto movements are in the Pareto efficient set. There's only one set, but that set has multiple options. Go ahead.
Right, and so I know you said not to think about the potato, but if you then had something like along with the potato that was higher in fiber and potassium than the apple or banana, then that along with the potato would be your new Pareto efficient set, and everything else would just be a movement instead of the apple and banana now being a set.
Yeah, so what would happen here is if I didn't have the potato, my Pareto efficient set would be the apple and the banana. At the instant I introduce the potato, suddenly there is a movement available from the apple to the potato. That's a Pareto movement. And there is a Pareto movement available from the banana to the potato. So the introduction of the potato obliterates the old Pareto efficient set. These two options that used to be Pareto efficient are not Pareto efficient anymore. Now the only thing in the Pareto efficient set is the potato. If there was something else out here as well, then maybe it and the potato would be in the Pareto efficient set. But it's possible there could be something way out here, like in this gray box. And something way out here, if there's only one of them, it'll be a single item in the Pareto efficient set. So there could be only one item in the set. The important thing is that everything in the set, there is no way to make a Pareto movement away from it.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies a lot.
Great. Thanks for that. And again, apologies for not seeing that or seeing your hands. Any other questions?
Could you really quickly go back to the part where you had in quotes how the trade-off related to this? I just want to screenshot that really quick.
Sure, we're heading quotes or the trade-off. You mean this part here? Okay.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I made that connection. Thank you.
Sure, and all of these slides are available online as well. The raw PowerPoint is available online. So if you'd like, you can follow along with me. Those of you, when I share a screen, I think by default, your Zoom takes over your full screen. For those of you who haven't figured it out, you can go into your Zoom settings and change that so that when I share a screen, it just shares within your window. And there is also a way you can, I think if you hit escape or double click on the image, then you can get out of full screen. So if you, for example, want to show my lecture on the side, but have the slides that I've already made, all of the slides from here to the end of the semester are available. So if you want to follow along next to them, you can do that as well. So feel free. All right, so we got this budget constraint line, and so we figure out how to draw those, and then so the beauty of the budget constraint line is it then is a line in between these 2 points. So if I give you 2 prices, the price of one good and the price of another good, and I give you a budget, then you should be able to draw the budget constraint line because you can calculate where it intersects this axis, and you can calculate where it intersects this axis. And once you've drawn those 2 hypothetical pure bundles, the pure fiber bundle, the pure potassium, the pure electricity bundle, the pure stuff bundle, then you can just draw this line between them. And that is the budget constraint line. And the potato, which would be a Pareto improvement, like if that potato was available, we would only pick that potato if we only care about fiber and potassium. It would be dumb for us to pick anything else because that potato is highest in both fiber and potassium. It's the best of both worlds. And so we normally would pick that potato, but we can't because we can't afford it. So it is above the options that we can afford. So the options that we can afford are all the options in this region that are below the budget constraint line. And all the options we can't afford, like the potato, are above it. And so all the options that fall on the budget constraint line are the options that we can just barely afford. But if we buy one of those options, we have no money left over. So, so here's an example that we can work on here. So we'll do this individually, and then I've got some breakout things we can do in a little bit here, a couple of slides. So if fiber is 1 cent per gram, and I have a budget of $1, how much fiber can I buy? So take a couple or, take a beat or so. And does anybody have an answer for that they'd like to share about a guess for how much fiber you can buy if it's a penny per gram and there's 100 pennies in $1, if I have a budget of $1, how many grams? All right, I see people coming up with some answers in the chats. So I'll let those come in and then we'll see how much we agree. All right, I see sort of a consensus in the chat for 100 grams. So that's what I would say too. So I'd say that we can buy 100 grams of fiber. And so if we're drawing our budget constraint line, then I would say I'd have to plot, I'd have to find 100 on here. So let's say 100 is up here somewhere. And then I would say say this is 100 grams. And I would draw my hypothetical pure fiber bundle. And that would be how much I could buy for $1. So this is $1, $1 US. So apologies for my mouse writing. So then let's do the other one. So let's say potassium has a different price. Potassium is 10 cents a gram. Now I still only have $1 budget. So how much potassium can I buy for 10 cents a gram? So feel free to put that in the chat. All right, I'm seeing some answers come in, more answers this time. Feels like, well, I'm getting more confidence. I got like 3 answers the first time and at least 5, 6 now. So I feel like people are starting to get this. All right, so that's right, 10 grams is how much potassium I can buy for $1. So to draw my budget constraint line, I then go down to my potassium axis, and let's say I draw 10 grams here. And this is my hypothetical pure potassium bundle. So then, and this is going to be ugly, but I'm going to attempt to draw a straight line from this bundle to the next one. I have no guarantees that this will be a straight line. If you have the ability to draw a straight line, you should use that ability. I do not have the ability, and so I'm going to draw my attempt at a straight line. All right, not so bad, I think. But imagine that's a straight line. Now, I have created a budget constraint line that basically says everything beneath this I can afford, and everything above this I cannot. So based on this, and the whole thing that set this up is, even though the apple and the banana were in my Pareto efficient set, fiber is cheaper than potassium. And because fiber, thanks, Satara, I appreciate the encouragement. It really is helpful. So even though fiber is, both of them are important to me, fiber is cheaper. Because fiber is cheaper, the budget constraint line is angled so that it is steep. And that steep budget constraint line ends up basically making it so that I can only afford the apple. I cannot afford the banana. So now my Pareto efficient set is apple only. The only feasible option that I can pick is the apple. I should not pick the orange because the orange is low in both potassium and fiber. I should pick the apple. I might like to pick the banana, but I can't. My budget just doesn't allow it. I have to buy an apple. We're stuck with apples. So, now maybe prices will change. So you could say, what if the, so this says, what if the price of fiber rises? So, so this, in the example that I picked here, I ended up cutting off the apple from the banana. Now I could have drawn this, because it's kind of arbitrary where I put this apple and this banana. And I could have drawn these so that maybe both of these, I just decided for the purpose of illustration, I would cut the 2 of them off there. But I could have drawn this so that both were feasible and they both stay in the Pareto efficient set. So the question here is, what if the price of fiber rises enough to cause the budget constraint line to intersect both? Well, what I mean by that is, what if, for example, I had my budget constraint line did this, and it just happened to be that, what did I have here? So let's say I had 10 grams here of fiber and 10 grams here. So let's just say that for $1, I could buy 10 grams of potassium and 10 grams of fiber. So remember, before I could buy 100 grams of fiber. And so now I'm saying that, that instead of buying 100 grams, I can only buy 10 grams. And I just happened to create, instead of my example that I created on the fly, sadly, my 10 grams is now potassium is kind of moved relative to what a banana is. So I apologize for that. I didn't mean to create confusion. But what I'm trying to focus on here is that if I change the price of fiber, it's going to make the budget constraint line go from being steep to being shallower. And I may end up making it so that I have multiple options on the same budget constraint line. And so now they're both of these options are the same price. These are both $1 options. So I can buy both of these for $1, either one, the apple and the banana. So now I can get access to both options in my Pareto efficient set. I have 2 options and I have a choice. So that's what budgets give you, is they give you choices. And then you then have to ask, all right, based on everything I can afford, what do I choose? Now I can only choose one of them. And so that's what creates this opportunity cost that, that if I choose the apple, I've used up my entire budget on the apple, so I can't choose the banana. So there's this term we're going to use, opportunity cost, which basically means once you've made a choice, you have given up a resource that allows you to make another choice that used to be available to you. So not only does the apple have a dollar cost, it's also got the banana cost. So when you pay for an apple, you're not only turning over a dollar, you're effectively turning over the potential banana that you could have eaten. So there is an opportunity cost to all of the things that you could have eaten, along with the money that you have to give up. So when you give up money, you're not only giving up the money itself, you're giving up all of the other things that you could have used that money on. So that's what we mean by opportunity cost. But we know that when we give people equally priced all options, people don't flip a coin and choose randomly between them. They will tend to choose some options over the others. That indicates to us that price isn't the sole thing that people are considering. It is the utility of these different goods and how these different utilities balance off against each other. We know that the utility of fiber differs from the utility of potassium. And we know that how much we need of fiber is going to differ based on how much fiber we already have. So we have to take all of these things into account along with price in order to figure out what people will end up deciding. And so Julia asks, is that the marginal rate of substitution? And that's what we're about to get to, is that the marginal rate of substitution is the steepness of these indifference curves. And so along these indifference curves are all of the things that you're willing to trade without kind of getting any extra money back from that. So in a pure barter economy, like this curve that the banana is on here. So the banana is down here. Let's pretend it is on this yellowish curve. Any bundle that happens to land on that curve, what the indifference curve says is that if we get rid of money, so we're in a pure barter economy, then you would be willing to give up your banana if someone gave you the bundle, the other bundle that was on that. Let's say it was a stalk of celery. For you, a banana is equivalent to a stalk of celery. For you, maybe not for me, but just say for you. Then in that case, you're willing to hand over the banana for the celery and you don't need any additional payment. So you're just willing to trade them equally. That's what an indifference curve is. It's the set of all things that you're willing to trade. Now, how this marginal rate of substitution fits in, so Julie asked about the MRS, that's kind of the exchange rate in terms not of the bundles, but in terms of the goods. And so at a particular point here, we can measure the steepness of this indifference curve. And that steepness, the slope of the indifference curve at any particular bundle, tells me how much I value fiber over potassium, given that this bundle gives me this much fiber and this much potassium. So if I have secured this much fiber and this potassium by this bundle, so I own the banana gives me this much fiber and this much potassium. The banana gives me a lot of potassium and very little fiber. So that tells me, because the steepness of this indifference curve, that steepness of that indifference curve tells me that if someone were to offer me a lot of potassium, I would not be that interested in that of potassium unless it is a huge amount, because the banana already gives me a lot of potassium. But if someone were to offer me a lot of fiber, I don't have much fiber. And so I would actually be willing to give up my potassium to gain that fiber. And so that's what the steepness of this curve is it is effectively the amount of the vertical axis that you are willing to gain or lose in exchange for the amount of the horizontal axis. And so the marginal rate of substitution is the delta fiber, the vertical axis, divided by the delta horizontal, the horizontal potassium. So a large one means that you are willing to trade a lot of fiber for a little potassium. A small one means you're willing to trade a lot of potassium for a little fiber. And so that's all going to be based upon how much of each one of those goods you already have. So, so that's, again, we will keep going over this stuff over and over. So some of these questions are kind of coming a little bit out of order, but I just want to make sure that I handle them. So the indifference curve, are we clear on what the indifference curve is? It represents all bundles of equal utility. In a barter economy where we just trade things without money, you would be willing to give up anything on the indifference curve for anything else on that same indifference curve without any additional haggling. You would like to obtain goods on higher indifference curves because those provide you more utility. They are Pareto improvements. But because of the budget constraint line, you're limited. So the indifference curve is just representing your preferences. I prefer a banana over an apple, over an orange. The best option that I pick will be the best indifference curve for the budget that I pick. So the budget limits me to everything that's under the budget. So if I plot both the budget line, which we now know how to draw, on top of indifference curves, and we can go out and survey people to get their indifference curves. And if we combine the budgets with the indifference curves, we can predict how they're going to choose, and we can predict how those choices will change if we change the prices of things, because that will shift the budget line around, which is what we'll practice on doing here. So, so the best option is where the budget constraint is tangent. That's what I'm trying to show here. The banana is the tangent point, the point where the banana's indifference curve just kisses the budget constraint line. That tangent point right there, that is the point where the rational consumer will choose. So they can afford everything under here. And so they will then make their budget distribution choices to achieve the highest utility. And that won't be, choosing this indifference curve, because by choosing the banana, they can reach a higher indifference curve. And a higher indifference curve means higher utility. So any other point on the budget line is on a lower indifference curve. That's what this tangency means, is that we've this yellow indifference curve has kind of graced our budgets. It's kind of graced us with, graced our budget, I guess, with its appearance, with its attendance. And so the banana is the one member of that that high utility indifference curve that just comes into play, just barely. And that's why we picked the banana. If we go to the left or right on the budget line, then we necessarily are going to reach bundles that are on indifference curves that are lower than the banana's indifference curves. And they necessarily have less utility. And we assume people make choices to maximize their utility. Is that clear? Are there questions about that? What I mean by tangency, that I draw the budget line, I draw the indifference curves, and the indifference curve that is tangent to the bundle, or to the, the bundle that is tangent to both, the bundle that is the point of tangency with the indifference curve and the budget constraint line. That's what we choose. Are there questions about what I mean by that? You should hopefully be able to draw a budget line. So if we were creating a business and analyzing indifference curves, would we want to create a bundle that would be at the tangency? It's more of, that's an excellent question. It's more of if we are, say, setting prices. So the indifference curves are something that we don't have control of as a producer. The indifference curves are a property of the psychology and the individual circumstances of the consumer. We can set prices as a producer, and we might ask, how does the amount that the consumer will buy vary with the prices we set? And what this will get at is, some of you may have heard of a demand curve. Some of you who took in microeconomics know what a demand curve. We, during this unit, very soon, if not, maybe the next lecture, are going to be able to generate a demand curve from these indifference curves. And that demand curve allows us to predict if for a change in price, how much do we change how much people buy? Or the other way around, if we wanted people to buy more or less, how much do we need to change the price? So this consumer choice theory shows us the relationship between pricing and consumption. But it requires us to model people's values first, and that's what the utility is all about. So, you know, the question of, do we want to create something that's at its tangency? You could, I mean, if there were no bundles that were available, if there were no fruits that were available at this point of tangency, then we could investigate, you know, well, if we were to create one there, people would choose one. So that is certainly in market research, that's partly what market researchers do, is say, is there a niche that's not being exploited that we could go into? Is that people are buying apples and bananas because they don't have access to pears. If we would just sell them pears, the pears are a Pareto improvement and they would buy the pears. So that's one way to view it. The other way to view it is, how do we get the price of pears down so that pears, which are on a higher indifference curve, if we could find a way to get the price of them down, then we know that people will pick them. And so that's a way to kind of figure out, how do we introduce pears into the budget set? So these are all sort of things that my marketers can do as well. And this will become more concrete as you read through the chapter and as we go through some exercises here.
Okay, thank you.
So in the chapter, this is the example they give. Same graphic that I've given you. The consumption bundle, this is like household consumption. This, they're saying that this household will consume 2.6 megawatt hours of electricity, and they will consume 9,868 units of everything non-electricity. And that is because there is a certain utility that they have for both electricity and non-electricity, and that's captured by this indifference curve. And there's a certain budget constraint line, and where the two of them meet is where we expect them to be. If we lowered the price of electricity, then we might expect them to choose this bundle. If we raise the price of electricity, we might expect them to choose this bundle. And that would reflect them they're going to use less electricity at the higher price. And because they're now spending more, they might actually consume less of stuff as well. If we lower the price of electricity, that might swing them out to this bundle, where at this bundle, they will consume more electricity, but they might actually consume more other things as well, because their electricity is cheaper and they now have more money available for other things. So this multi-good approach not only shows us how prices change consumption of a single good, but how the knock-on effects, the side effects of changing prices affect the consumption of other goods, which is important. You know, if we just, you know, if we change electricity, you know, we might think, great, we got people to use less electricity, but we don't realize what we're also doing is getting them to use less of other things. And from a sustainability point of view, that's really important to know that, wow, by making people use less electricity, we have also had the side effect of making them use less gas. You know, who knew? And in some ways, it seems a little evil to make people spend more on electricity, to thus constrain them from using more gas. But it is good for us to know that if they're spending more on electricity, they will spend less on gas. So this is how we're trying to link all these trade-offs together. Just other things to think about this point of tangency. You might ask, well, is it possible for the best option, the option that the consumer chooses, to be at an intersection of an indifference curve and the budget constraint line? And I hope you can see that that would be impossible, because if the indifference curve were intersecting, then that would mean that moving along the budget constraint line would necessarily mean finding higher indifference curves. So it really is that point of tangency that's special. So if there is a bundle available there, and we're, in the case of electricity, we're assuming you can smoothly choose any electric level, whereas in the case of fruit, we're kind of stuck in this quantized world where you can only choose an apple or a banana. But if you can choose smoothly among the good, then we always assume that you're going to find that point of tangency. All right, so now let's do some exercises here. All right, so let me do some breakout rooms for this. So I got a blank axis here. And so what we want to do is, so we've been talking about how these budget constraint lines interact with these indifference curves. But I want us to get a better feeling for the shape of these indifference curves before we start really diving deep into marginal rate of substitution, which will be something that we're going to spend a lot more time on later, and how marginal rate of substitution relates to prices. So MRS, we're going to dive deeper in at Thursday's lecture. And so now we really want to focus on the shape of these utility functions. So let's, I'm going to put you into breakout rooms, and then in your breakout rooms, I want you to sort of come up with what do you think the indifference curves would look like if the utility of a bundle was its cost. So some people, think that price is a signal of value. Let's take that seriously and say, well, what if that is exactly the only reason people buy fiber is because fiber is expensive? Or the only reason people buy potassium is that potassium is expensive? Or what this question is really asking is the price of a bundle is its utility. So the hint that I'm going to give you here is, what do we know about all bundles that fall on the budget constraint line? So, and then the answer to that hint is, if two bundles are on the budget constraint line, they're both the same price, they're the budget. So try to use that in mind. This is not an easy question. So we'll take maybe 3-4 minutes in your groups to figure out, what do you think these indifference curves do you think they would look like this? Do you think they would look like this? Maybe they look like this. Maybe they look partially like this and partially like that. What do the indifference curves look like? What's the rough shape of them? Are they bowed out? Are they bowed in? Are they straight? Are they angled in a particular direction or another direction? So we just want to try to get an idea of what the shapes of these are. So any questions about that before I throw you out into your breakout rooms? And then I will pop from breakout room to breakout room. And I think Corin may also help. So Corin is an instructional assistant who has been manning the classroom experience for those of you who decide to show up to the class. And she has also got her own laptop and will be able to pop around as well. And so any questions before we do the breakout rooms? And all right, so I need to claim host back, and I need to figure out why it says I'm host, but why do not, oh, maybe it's under more. Apologize, okay, there we go. All right, so I'm gonna put everybody in, say, 3 to 4 person breakout rooms. So I'm going to create the breakout rooms here again, just coming up with hypothetical shapes for this if the utility of a bundle is its cost. All right, I think we've got everybody back. Okay, so and maybe I can, I guess, reshare here. All right, does anybody have thinking that they would like to share? Actually, let me try a different share. Stop share. Okay. So yeah, while I'm sharing separate, does anybody have thoughts that they would like to share about what shape they think these indifference curves will be?
I have a guess for the cost one.
Okay.
My guess would it just be just a straight line between from fiber or to potassium?
A straight line like this one?
Yeah.
Okay. I think this is on the right track of thinking for sure. Um, so, you know, in the indifference curves, we want multiple curves. So the indifference curves, you know, fill out the space. And so it's like a mesh of curves. And so what we're trying to say is what's the shape of all of the curves in that mesh? If every bundle, oh shoot, I didn't realize you were at 115 already. In my mind, my last class went to a different time. So I apologize, we're at 115, we're at time. So yeah, so we'll get back to this the next time, but basically the answer to this one is that these will all be parallel lines that are with the same slope as the budget constraint.
Oh, right, because there's
That's
multiple.
the
Okay.
right.
Right, I forgot
And
there's
so,
multiple.
yeah, and so every bundle lands on one of these. Every bundle has other bundles that are the same price. And so every bundle has other bundles that have the same utility given the price is utility. And so we'll go through some of these examples again next time. I took a little too long on that one. I apologize for that. So, so let's do an attendance exercise here. So I will put this also in the chat. I apologize for going a little over here. The attendance exercise URL is in the chat. Oh, I meant to send that to everybody. URL will be in the chat now. Let's say okay, if the price of fiber, and only one question today, if the price of fiber is PF and if the budget is B, then where does the budget constraint line intersect the fiber axis? So we showed how to draw a budget constraint line on the fiber potassium axis. If the price of fiber is PF, is my variable, and if the budget is B, then at what value does the budget constraint line intersect that fiber axis? And so that's all we have there. That's all I have for you today. Again, we will revisit this stuff next time as we get more deep into marginal rate of substitution. Apologies for running the breakout rooms a little longer than I was planning. And if so, otherwise, if you have any questions, you can feel free to stay on. I'm happy to handle those. Otherwise, you can take off.
Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Yep. You too. All right, I see that there's only about 13 participants left. And there's only one attendance question for today. It's just that question. You don't have to get it right. You just have to give me a kind of a coherent answer. You can give me a little mathematical formula. You can say, oh, it's it's B times PF, or it's PF divided by B, or it's B divided by PF, or something like that. Just put that into the response. And so that's, I'm just kind of looking for a formula that involves B and PF. So you can click on the link, put it into the answer for question 1, and hit submit. Fiber, I think we made as the y-axis, but it shouldn't matter for this question. So regardless of which axis it is, if I give you the price and I give you the budget, you should be able to predict where the budget constraint line hits it. All right. So with that, doesn't look like I see any other questions. So I will go ahead and end the meeting, and we'll see everybody on Thursday.